thank you very much for taking the time out of what I'm sure is a whole busy schedule for you today to join the session today. It's really appreciated. So my name is Damien Callanan. I work in our European leadership development business, and so I'm based here in the UK. So we're really excited to be running the session today. This is actually the second time that we've run a session on hybrid team leadership. We ran the first one back in August, and it was so popular that we decided that we'd run it again. I think we had about 500 participants register last time round, and we were getting up well into the hundreds for this one as well. So that's great. I'll leave my colleague Leah Clark to introduce herself and explain a little bit more about what today's session is all about in a moment. But what I do know is that this topic is just incredibly important to many of our clients and and staff that have been traditionally working in an office environment, and over the last 18 months have moved that to a home one, and trying to work through and navigate that whole transition back to office. And so we're going to be talking a lot about that and how they're managing that whole piece together. So just to let you know that given we've got lots and lots of participants, unfortunately, we've had to mute everybody just to try and get rid of any background noises of dogs and doorbells and delivery drivers or whatever's going on in your world today. So if you've got any questions, please just put them into the chat, and either we'll answer them as we go through, or I'll collect some themes up and we'll answer them at the end. If I don't have time to answer a specific question, or we don't on this call today, no problem at all. I'm happy to talk to you separately as well at some stage, and we can answer specific questions after today's session. So please do feel free to contribute in the chat as well. That would be great, because there's lots of different people from lots of different companies on the call. So we'd love to hear your own perspectives and experiences, and even some ideas. If you've got some great ideas that you want to share around this new way in which we're all working, that would be really good for everybody. One last thing is that this session will be recorded, so if you do have to jump out early or just have to nip out for 5 or 10 minutes, we can send you a copy of the recording. We'll do that to everybody that's registered today as well. So nothing else from me at this stage, but so I really hope you enjoyed today's webinar. And Leah, I will leave it over to you to take the mic from here.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, good morning, good afternoon to many of you on the call. I see some friends and colleagues in the participant list, so happy that you're joining us today. And before we get started, I'm Leah Clark. I'm Senior Director of Leadership for GP Strategies. And so what that means is I have the good fortune of being able to do research on leadership, drive our thought leadership effort, participate in webinars like this, inform our product development efforts, and really enjoy hearing from many of the folks who participate in these webinars in the chat. As you ask questions at the end, I often learn as much as hopefully I share in these sessions, and I'm sure that today will be no different. You know, as Damien indicated, we ran this webinar back in the August timeframe. And as we get into the discussion today, it really occurred to me how much has changed on this topic, even in the past month, as the summer certainly, caused greater concern about the Delta variant, and folks considered what hybrid really meant for them and when they were ready to embrace hybrid. Even just 30, 60, 90 days has a dramatic impact on the perspective that many organizations have on this topic. So it was relevant a month ago, it continues to be, and I'm sure it will be something that we're talking about for many, many months to come. So here's what we'll cover today. We'll talk about what hybrid is, the challenges and benefits of a hybrid team, the 4 critical elements of a high-performing team, spoiler alert, really in any environment, the unique challenges that happen when you try to lead a team in a hybrid world. And then towards the back end of the discussion, I'll share with you the mindset shift and skill set sharpening, a lot of S's there, that leaders need to do to really foster teamwork. So let's get into it. I think there's been a lot of discussion among colleagues in articles in the industry about the whole work from home, work in the office battle, if you will, battle of perspectives and who has it better. For some folks say, I love working from home in my pajamas. Others really miss that back to the office, getting dressed up and going in. Perhaps you want to be having lunch with your colleagues. You miss that catered lunch that occasionally showed up, and the glamour of having that bowl of cereal over the counter in your kitchen, guilty as charged, while working from home is not as glamorous as perhaps you thought it would be. Then there are others who say, gosh, you know what? I don't need that commute anymore. My life is so much better and more balanced because I have this additional time at home. Others say, I miss the commute, and I really enjoyed that time where I could separate myself from home and work and have a clear delineation. Others debating, oh, the office is a place where I'm distracted, or if you have little ones at home or a partner who's maybe working at home, home might be the greater distraction for you. And then last but not least, I think a lot of conversation, and I'll talk today as we progress through the discussion about connection versus isolation and how we're all feeling working in a hybrid or remote environment over time as it relates to connection with our peers. The bottom line is really that no one individual, the work from home or the in-person, has it best, right? Really, so much depends on personal styles, people's needs, and the role of work in each individual's life. So one of the messages I'll share as we get into the discussion is that it's going to be important to understand that as a leader for each of your people, personal style, people's needs and work in their life. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. First, let's define hybrid. As I got ready for this discussion, even a month ago, I thought, well, hybrid is really on the tip of everybody's tongue these days. And yet, not that long ago, at least for me, anytime I used the word hybrid, it was in reference to a car. Maybe a hybrid fruit. This is a mashup, I think, of an orange or a kiwi. It certainly doesn't exist in nature, but here's a hybrid. Or maybe when you talked about hybrid, you were referring to your dog, a mashup of a golden doodle or a golden retriever and a poodle, which is my hybrid dog. But I'm not talking about any of these, right? We're talking about hybrid as defined in the following: a portion of the company that commutes to an office and a portion that works remotely, with the ability to flex back and forth to either. So that's our definition for today. And, you know, a lot of folks have said, well, why is this relevant? I've been working virtually for years. Why is this such an important topic now? And I think these are really the reasons why it's such a relevant area to be exploring and unpacking at an organizational, leader, and individual level, because the scale at which it's happening is unprecedented, not just certainly because of lockdown, but as we figure out what a mid or post-pandemic world looks like, there is going to be a much larger cross-section of the population that's going to be working virtually or in a hybrid environment. It's now more of a strategic decision versus an accommodation. I think in the past, you might have had one or two folks who needed to adjust their schedules to work virtually. Now companies are themselves saying, we are making a strategic decision to be a virtual first or a hybrid first organization. As a result, there is greater attention being given to what are the implications for the individuals. What is their remote reality? How is their office structured? How can we consider what their needs are if this is going to be the scenario? Certainly greater attention for organizations when it happens at scale. How does this reshape our hiring process? The way we compensate people if they're not in the city in which the physical office is? What does career development look like in a hybrid environment? And I think what's happening, and I think this is a great change or shift, is that it is becoming much more of a shared responsibility. Again, organization, leader, and employee working together to figure out how you can make the best of this environment. And it's something different. Hybrid, as we're talking about it, it's not 2021's virtual. 2021's virtual, I would say, is not the norm. Something is very different, or hybrid is something very different, and it's not for all. But there are many organizations and many employees, and I think this is a really interesting dynamic, who are saying, look, we've lived in this virtual world, And we don't see the need to go back. This letter on the right-hand side was written by Apple employees to their executives calling out the benefits of hybrid. And you can see a little bit of an excerpt from that letter where they're saying, we've gotten it done under extreme conditions, much more extreme conditions. And we find that there have been benefits. Let us articulate them to you. Diversity and inclusion and retention and hiring. We're no longer limited to who we hire by that geographical or physical footprint. We think our communication has gotten better, better work-life balance, integration of those who are already working in a remote environment, and certainly the safety associated with the reduced spread of pathogens. So employees are saying, these are the benefits, and we want to make sure that we continue, for those who want this scenario, to retain those benefits. And again, you can see on that left-hand side as well, that ability to source talent from anywhere, greater flexibility, less expensive for organizations who are reducing their physical footprint. And at the same time, we're hearing a lot about employees saying, I'm fatigued. I have less balance than maybe I thought I was going to have in this environment. And in some ways, I'm struggling with the lack of connection that I have with my employees. So what is it here? What are they asking for? Well, employees are simultaneously saying, I want this and I'm challenged by it. And I want some help from you, leader and organization, to figure out how to make this work. So employees are simultaneously saying, I want this, and I recognize that there are some challenges associated with it. They're really saying that they want the ability to have the best of both worlds. They want flexibility. And whether you look at the data on the right-hand side from Microsoft's annual work trends, or whether you take a look at pop culture and the way we live on Instagram, the messages are clear in the data and in social media. Employees are asking for both, right? 80% of managers say they expect more flexible work from home policies. 73% of employees want flexible remote work options to stay, and yet a large portion say, I want collaboration and in-person. We're saying, employees are saying, I want both. I want to be able to have the option of getting dressed up and going into the office, and I also want to be able to work from home in my athleisure wear. What they're really asking for, again, is flexibility. And organizations are scrambling to try and figure out how to respond. You have some like Morgan Stanley who say, you know, we do our best work inside these offices. Or JP Morgan, if you can go to dinner in New York, you can come into the office. So they're taking a pretty clear stance on where they want their employees to be. You have organizations like Pepsi saying, look, the pandemic has proven it's doable. They take an approach, I think Pepsi calls it work that works. And they really don't set any sort of a standard around the number of in-office days. It's more flexible. They do have some specific commentary about when collaboration and innovation are required. You know, there are certain circumstances under which they want folks in the office, but by and large, they're going with an employee-driven, much more flexible work that works scenario. And then there is poor Uber and Apple and others who in the June timeframe said, we are ending our remote work environment and we are returning to the office. And they got pushback from their employees and they had to back down and then come out again. Now they're in a position because of the variant where they're moving the line. So instead of a September return to work, they're saying January. But organizations for sure are scrambling to figure out how to make this work and what their policy is going to be. And I think they better figure it out fast. There are challenges, real or perceived, that both organizations and employees are recognizing. And I do want to acknowledge that as we have this conversation about what employees want and what organizations are going to do, that not all industries and not all jobs have what I'll call the luxury of being able to work from home. Certainly there are frontline workers and factory workers and other folks for whom this is not a conversation they can even engage in because their role requires them to be in a physical location. Yet there is a very large cross section of workers for whom this is a meaningful debate. So there are challenges. Let's talk about those, real or perceived. A lot of folks concerned about our culture. How are we going to retain our culture if we're in a hybrid environment? I think especially for individuals who are new to an organization. Maybe it's a little different if you've been together and then you scatter. Your culture is to some extent already established, but what about for the new folks coming on? There are others who say, you know what, culture isn't defined by our physical footprint, by our cubes in our offices. Culture transcends our physical connectedness. Questions about productivity. This one I find really interesting because a lot of the data, including GP's own, has indicated that employees have gotten it done in a hybrid or virtual environment. They've been productive. In fact, Mercer released a great study that indicated organizations, 90% of them said that their productivity has been the same or better. There's a flip side to this that we're going to talk about in a moment, but productivity, still some concerns there. A lot of discussion around meeting effectiveness, and we'll talk about what you can do to up your game from a meeting perspective. But I was talking to a leader not too long ago who said, you know, we tried our first hybrid meeting and it didn't go that well. We had a couple of folks in the office in New York. We had somebody dialing in, couldn't get the technology right. Took the laptop and propped that person up at the end of the table, and we had the meeting that way. And you know what? It was clunky. It didn't go particularly well. So meeting effectiveness is a big challenge, real again or perceived. Team cohesion. How will we gel if we're not together in person? How are we going to collaborate? A lot of leaders talking about their concerns that innovation and collaboration that happens when folks bump into each other at the water cooler in the office, that's going to dissipate. And so I would challenge that, as I probably would challenge many of these, but it's fair. You know, can you collaborate when you're in a digital environment? That fatigue, this is a really big one that I think we need to talk about. I believe it was, again, it might have been the Microsoft study that said, high productivity is masking an exhausted workforce. I think this is a real one that we'll have to come to terms with. And the two at the end are very sensitive areas for me because I think this is, you know, uncharted territory. How are we going to ensure career development continues to happen in a hybrid environment, and that we don't fall back on an out of sight, out of mind perspective where those in the office are perceived as the hustlers and those who are really committed to their career and those who are choosing to work from home are not seen in the same light. And then how do we ensure equitable treatment? I tapped into that a little bit in my comments about career, but concerns about proximity bias, I think are real. So if we see that these challenges are here and people, your employees who are asking for a hybrid environment recognize them as well, you know, why don't we just throw in the towel? Why don't we just say that these challenges are real and so everybody just go back into the office? Well, that's not what your people are saying. Your people are saying, look, I want that flexibility and I recognize that these are challenges. So let's work together to figure this out. It's going to be clunky. It's going to take some time, but we're both vested in making this hybrid scenario work. And today we're talking about the leader, right? We're going to talk about what the leader can do to really up their game. But I don't want to leave you with the impression, so I'll say it now in case I forget, that this is something that leaders need to solve. It's not. The individual has a vested interest in working to figure out what hybrid scenario works for them. But for today, we're talking about the leader specifically and what the leader can do to lead a high-performing team in a hybrid environment. It's a shared responsibility ultimately, though. Okay, so with all of this as a backdrop and with all of these challenges, Where do leaders need to focus? How do they need to lead differently? How do they get their head around what they need to be as a hybrid leader, and where they need to get their team focused? Well, again, spoiler alert, they need to focus on the same things that they've always needed to focus on: contribution and satisfaction. They need to understand and be clear about what they need their teams contributing. What does success look for the organization, for the group, and for the individual? Set goals, give feedback. They need to focus in a hybrid world on getting all of their employees to contribute. At the same time, they need to also be mindful of individual satisfaction. And I would include under that issues of career development, wellness, and well-being. And I believe, to my comments earlier and what the data has shown, that for the most part, the contribution side of the equation has proven to be successful, that we can figure out how to get it done in a hybrid environment. The refrain to that, "we've gotten it done," is often, "but at what cost? I'm exhausted, I'm fatigued, where is my career?" And so my challenge is, as leaders, while you focus on contribution and satisfaction, I would say there is a need to redouble your efforts as a leader on the satisfaction side of the equation. So what does that look like? What do I mean by that? Understand what's important to your employees. What has shifted for them in terms of their values? Or maybe you haven't had a conversation with them ever about what's important to them. Be vested in their personal satisfaction. Understand what their, again, remote reality is. Are they fatigued? Look for signs of well-being and wellness, and what you can do to support changes that might need to be made to improve that wellness and well-being. We recently did research, and we asked employees what was most important to them in the work that they do. I'm sort of paraphrasing the question here, but wellness and well-being and work-life balance rose to the top of the list even before compensation. So compensation will always be important in a job that people do, but as a higher priority, they really want to do work that also allows them to maintain their wellness and their well-being. And I was not surprised to see that, given what we have all been through in the past year. Be mindful of career development regardless of location. Back to some of my earlier comments, make sure that you're focusing on helping people develop their career, those in the hybrid remote part of your team, as well as those in the office, and don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. So these conversations need to happen with each of your team members. All right, so in light of that, you need to get them to focus on contribution and satisfaction. What really does need to change, I would say, is, as a leader, you need to shift your mindset and sharpen your skill sets, applying those skill sets in a new context. In other words, the good news is, as a hybrid leader, you don't need some new radically different set of skills. You simply need to apply those skills with a different nuance in light of the hybrid context. So same skill set, different context. But you do, I think, need to shift your mindset. So let's talk about what that mindset shift needs to look like, and then we'll get into that skill set sharpening. So the mindset shift that I'm talking about is to move, or to think as a leader, digital first and virtual first. As you're going to hire or host a meeting or conduct some sort of an offsite like event, or do a one-on-one, digital first, virtual first. How can I consider the way I need to do things differently in light of the fact that not everybody is going to be sitting around that table? And then we have at GP Strategies a particular point of view around 4 key mindsets that we think are critical for leaders to lead successfully. And I want to talk about how those are particularly relevant for a hybrid leader. So a hybrid leader needs to have an agile mindset. This one probably surprises no one. I think a lot of leaders have gotten a lot better at this. The ability to pivot quickly. And we're seeing that, as I mentioned early on, even in the past couple of months, out of the office, returning in September. Nope, maybe not, returning in January. So the ability to pivot as a leader, to be agile and have that agile mindset is critical. To have an inclusive mindset. How do I make sure that I am calling on all members of my team and including in conversations and decisions both the in-person and the remote employees? How am I allowing folks to bring their full selves to the environment, to the team in a very authentic way? Being mindful that this can be more challenging for folks in certain populations. So inclusivity and having that inclusive mindset, but being sensitive to some of the challenges of certain populations is key. Having an enterprise mindset. That's all about making sure your employees are focused on the larger goals of the organization and the customers that you serve. How can you remind them of that when you're in a hybrid environment and you're not maybe physically reminded of that by being in the office together? And then that growth mindset. When I talked about it being clunky, know that that will be the case as you implement a hybrid scenario and as you work through your relationships with your virtual team members and in-person members. It's going to be clunky, but you'll learn and you'll get better. And being vested in that, both your employees and you as the leader, is key. Okay, so let's now that we've talked about mindsets, again, mindset shift, think digital first, think virtual first, and I would advocate for applying those 4 mindsets as you move forward as a leader.
Yeah, just
yeah, please.
Sorry to just jump in. Yeah, there's a couple of questions that came up and some themes that people are sending over to me, just around people who are new to hire and how they can kind of accelerate that new to hire individual who is still based at home, who doesn't have those accidental conversations with people around the water cooler, or doesn't go out for lunch with people. So just any thoughts around that? This came through from a few people.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call out. And I think a particular area of concern, because as I mentioned, when you have a team that's together first and you're able to gel, you get to know each other, and then you scatter, it's a little bit easier to maintain that connection, whereas a new hire doesn't have that initial in-person base. But what I'm going to say, Damien, and it's a bit of a spoiler alert for something that I'll share as we go throughout the presentation, is you need to be more intentional in the way you go about bringing that new hire into the fold of the team and the organization. So you need to set up those introductions that may have happened in an informal way because they've walked around the office in the past. Maybe establish a group lunch that happens virtually because they're not able to have lunch with the team in person. Some folks have even gotten creative around, sending food to the different team members. So you have that that team lunch together, screens on, everybody may be enjoying the same treats, but you're creating that sense of connection. Having that swag box that might show up for that new hire with the pens and the pad and the equipment that they might get when they're physically there, the first time. So some of those things that you would do in person, the meetings, the lunch together, the sort of the trappings of your physical space, you need to get more intentional and more creative about how to find ways to foster that sense of connection.
Great. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, Damien, that I'm missing?
No, just a couple of people around themes around culture as well, and how do you maintain that culture when people are working from home, and particularly organisations where they feel like that culture really comes from the strength of the collective, seeing each other every day, etc. That's the theme that's coming for a few people as well.
Great. Yeah. So let's talk about that as we get into it, and we'll circle back to that at the end, because I think there are some things that I'll share with you in the high performing teams that will touch upon that. So let's.
And then just one final one just came in just now is how can hybrid leaders deal with employees who are fatigued or have burnout? Particular one, that could be a long can't answer that one, but
yeah, and we'll get into some tips, but I'll touch upon that a little bit now. So I think first of all, as a leader, you need to be tuned in to the signs and the you need to be tuned into the signs of where maybe an employee is struggling. I'm not suggesting that leaders need to become psychiatrists and cross that line into looking for, true psychological challenges or issues, right? That's not the role we're asking for leaders to take on. But they can look for the signs of fatigue and burnout, both in terms of the communication that they're getting from their people. Are you hearing from that person as regularly as you used to? Are they, missing deadlines or meetings, or not showing up in the way that they have in the past? Are they verbalizing to you that they're having challenges? Ask them, right? Back to that word intentionality. If you're not clear, if you're reading the signs, have that conversation openly. How are things going for you this week? Are on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, what were your highs this week? What were your lows? If you're not sure if that person is struggling or you think they might be intentional about asking them the questions that will help to draw that out. I would say also, and we'll get into this as well, more frequent check-ins with your people. You might have bumped into them in the hall in the past, and that happened organically. You're going to have to be perhaps more intentional about finding those ways to check in with them. So we'll get into that a little bit, and I'll talk about some other wellness and well-being things that you can do to mitigate, I guess, that issue for your team members. So a little bit of a preview, and we'll chat about that as we get in. Okay, so 4 elements of high-performing teams: building trust, seeking alignment, creating connection, and driving results. And as I said at the beginning, these are not the elements of a high-performing hybrid team. They're the key elements of a high-performing team, but there are nuances to how you build trust, seek alignment, create connection, and drive results in a hybrid environment. And I want to share with you some practical ways that you can do that. So first of all, building trust is certainly about making sure that everyone on your team feels as though they are supported by you as the leader and by their colleagues, and that they can show up as their authentic selves, that there is that sense, as we know the term, of psychological safety. So first of all, give people the opportunity to share their lived experience. What about a flexible hybrid environment is important to them? Maybe they have a teenager who's coming off the bus from high school in her first year, and they want to be home for that person. Maybe they have an elderly parent who they want to be able to keep an eye on. Maybe they have a new pet and they want to be there for that pet and to be able to manage that. Give them the opportunity to share their lived experience. And as a leader, go first. Set the stage, set the tone by sharing yours. Now, I want to draw or call out something that a colleague of mine mentioned when I did this webinar the last time, that for certain populations, and she is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, she said, you know what, Leah, it's not always something that's comfortable for everyone to share that lived experience. And I thought that that was a very fair call out that I wanted to mention the next time I had this conversation. You may need to go slowly, but certainly build trust by increasingly giving people the opportunity to share that lived experience as they're comfortable, and as a leader, share your own. Make sure all of your team members feel free to contribute. Back to some of the challenges that I mentioned, be mindful of whether or not you are just hearing from your in-office team members. Make sure that it's not the loudest voice that is physically next to you that is being heard, but ensure that your individuals who are working in that flexible arrangement have the opportunity to contribute and have their voices be equally as valued and heard. When you do that, you will engender trust. When they feel valued, they feel their contributions are valued. I've said this before, make career development a priority for all employees. And I don't want to just leave it there, because as I put this together, I was sensitive to the fact that this might sound like a platitude. Oh, make it a priority. How do you do that? You can do that on a regular basis and in a very simple way. It doesn't need to be a really deep, milestone conversation. Each week, ask your employee, what was the best part of your week? What are skills that you haven't used that you'd like to? Just incorporating in questions like that will start to provide you as a leader, will start to shed light on that satisfaction side of the equation for each of your employees. Ensure equitable communication. This is a bit of a theme that hopefully you've heard as well. Making sure that the folks in the remote arrangement are hearing the same thing at the same time as those in the office. Create a source of truth and be transparent in your communication. Back to the topic of the slide here, how to build trust. Nothing's going to erode trust faster than if there is a perceived lack of equitable communication. And then demonstrate empathy. So back to some of the questions, Damien, that were coming up about wellness and well-being. Be mindful of fatigue and burnout. Do you need to ensure that your employee is taking breaks? What is their physical office setup like? And is there something that you can do to make the physicality of that office space better for them? Some organizations were doing things like no meeting Mondays or no meeting Fridays to try and give people a little more time to be relieved of that Zoom fatigue and work on what they need to work on. Some leaders are, timing or delaying their emails so that they aren't going out at all hours of the night, so that your employees don't feel like at 10 o'clock, I got an email from my leader, I need to be on, right? Being mindful of these things that we can do and demonstrate as leaders to show that we care about our employees, we care about their well-being. Okay, seeking alignment. Seeking alignment is making sure that we're all working towards the same goals. In the office, out of the office, you have that team aligned to what you need them to do. So one thing I want to say about alignment is, to the extent there is that flexible environment in the office some days and then not, be clear as a leader about when you have in-office expectations or moments. Again, I was talking to another leader not that long ago, and the team was preparing for a large client pitch. The leader assumed that everyone doing the pitch was going to be in the office on that day, but didn't articulate that. And true to form, many who had been working remotely for quite some time logged in and did the pitch in a virtual scenario, as they had done for many, many months. And she was annoyed about that, and they felt that. Well, you know what? It would have been much better to be clear about those in-office moments and have that conversation than to hint or hope. So one way to seek alignment, I would say, is if there are times where you want your employees in the office, have that conversation. Don't hint or hope that they get it. Align to goals more regularly. You may need to be, here's the word again, intentional. Verbalize what those goals are, and find ways to talk to your people about how they're doing and the progress that they're making. That may mean check-ins that happened in an intense, tired of that word. So instead of bumping into somebody in the hallway, maybe you need to have a conversation with them at the end of the day as you're driving home and they're in their remote environment. Or maybe you have regular check-ins in the morning about what they're working on, to the extent that's not too frequent for that employee. But you need to align to goals more regularly. Be clear and transparent about the work of the team. Share much more regularly what everybody's working on so that each member of that team understands what each part is contributing to the whole, what each member is contributing. Listen more carefully. And this visual here, this kind of crazy swirling, the thing that I'd like you to remember is in listening more carefully, I think a hybrid leader needs to be able to separate the noise from the message or the signal. So filter the signal from the noise. And I see that that's a challenge, particularly for a hybrid leader, because there's communication coming at you from many directions. You're getting a text, you're getting emails, you're on group calls, you're on Zooms, you're getting visual feedback. And so there may be a lot more swirling from a lot of different modalities. I think the leader needs to do a better job of actively listening and trying to filter out what is the noise and what is the signal. I think they also need to be a lot more careful about tone and picking up on the nuances of communication in a hybrid environment. Listen for the struggles, particularly of new employees. To the question that somebody asked earlier, I think being really tuned into the challenges of that employee is critical. And then last but not least, coach regularly in a way that encourages self-reliance. Why is this different, right? Some of you, again, might be saying, well, gosh, coaching is a leadership skill that you need regardless. Well, when you have some more scattered and dispersed employees, they're going to be, and you're going to want to drive self-reliance, the ability to make decisions and hold yourself accountable. And when you coach and coach and coach, you increase the ability for that employee to be much more self-reliant and make decisions on their own. Yeah, and I see, I'm just kind of skimming the chat here. Carol is talking about better project management skills or tools. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, there are tools and technology that can help in collaboration and innovation. I chose not to bring that into this discussion simply because I was focused more on the dynamics of the leader, but I do think to Karen's point, there is a whole other topic of how to leverage technology to enable much of this in a hybrid environment. Okay, I'm going to speed us along and do a chat question because I'm keeping an eye on the clock. And if you remember, the next area in high-performing teams was creating connection. What I'd like to know is what is one way you've seen your team keep connection alive in a virtual and hybrid world? So I would love for you to start putting some things in the chat. What is one way you've seen your team keep connection alive in a virtual or hybrid world? I always get some new ideas when I ask this question. So I'll see what you all, virtual coffee clubs. Okay. Yep. Actually, I should tell you, it's early here in the US. I still have my coffee with me. So I'm with you, Jessica. Regular check-ins where we don't talk about work. Absolutely. Thanks for that, Katie. Others, what creative ways? Weekly virtual breakfasts on Fridays, touch base meetings, weekly quiz. Yeah, Andrew, now you're starting to really tap into the creative element. Those are awfully fun. Going for a walk and talk on the phone to be away from the desk. My good friend Tim Batchelor, love that, absolutely. Recipe for 3 courses. That one's going fast. Check in throughout the day. WhatsApp. I think there was a cooking suggestion I missed. Daily meeting updates. Yeah, keep them coming as we progress through. This is great because I'd love for you to share from each other as we go through. But you're keying in on it, right? You're keying in on some of the creative ways that we can create connection. So first of all, and please do keep them coming as I go through here. As you create connection as leader, demonstrate emotional intelligence. So tune a lot more into body language and eye contact and how you're coming across to others. Those cues are easier to read perhaps in person. Be more mindful of how you're showing up for people, more intentional, and the impact that you may be having on them, how you're coming across to them. Keep eye contact in meetings by having everyone use a computer. This is one that is maybe a little controversial because it can feel somewhat goofy at first, but a lot of folks are advocating for having meetings where those in person have their laptops open in the meeting room and those at home clearly do. And it's a way for folks to sort of level the playing field, if you will, and keeping eye contact in a similar direction. If any of you have tried this, please put in the chat how it's worked or not. In the last time I asked this webinar, I had someone pop in the chat and say, we've been doing this and it's actually working quite well. So might feel a little awkward at first, but give that a try. Intentional check-ins. You all have put that in the chat here. So whether that is a weekly morning text check-in or once a week call that you might not have done regularly, creating those intentional check-ins is critical. As a leader, you might even want to create office hours. So that space in the week where there is an opportunity for your folks to dial in and catch you as a leader in that open office hours. Find opportunities for the team to connect on the personal side of things. You all have talked about this, right? Sharing your furry friends, what's happening at home. This is a little bit humorous, but what happens at the beginning of every meeting? Everyone starts chatting about the weather, right? And as maybe mundane as that seems, right, that's the way we connect with that pre-meeting chatter, whether it's about weather or the weekend, or something happening with our children. Don't lose that in a hybrid environment, right? And so when you begin a meeting, log on right away so that your people at home don't lose that chit chat. Find ways to make sure that they're included in that connecting on the personal side of things. Maybe it is some of the activities that some of you put in the chat, happy hours or work from home, painting scenarios where everybody gets together and either cooks or paints or does something. Make sure you're celebrating rituals and accomplishments, both personal ones and the milestones that you hit as a team. Some of you have put in the chat some of the other ways that teams and leaders are connecting. Maybe there is a Yammer site or a team site where you are contributing, hashtag parenting tips or hashtag wellness tips, work from home, failures. Keep it light, keep it humorous, but find other ways to use technology and, the trivia that somebody mentioned, quiz night, all of these great ways that you can find ways to create that connection on your team. And then last but not least, I'm keeping an eye on the time, Damien, so we have some time for questions at the end. Driving results. How can you do that? Set clear goals around what success looks like and provide feedback. As a leader as well, ask for feedback. You might need to be more intentional in soliciting that from your people, because when you're in the office, you can pick up on those cues. They're not sure. You can see that furrowed brow. They're not sure about something. It's harder to read that in a hybrid or virtual environment. So make sure you're proactively asking for that feedback. There's my second point. Keep one-on-ones, and as I mentioned earlier, create office hours. I think it's a lot easier when you're when you have a hybrid team member, you just take that invitation and you punt it out a week because you have something else that you needed to do. And in the absence of that clear communication from you to your individual, they might start to wonder, why was that canceled? Is there some reason why they don't want to talk to me? In the office, they can see you got pulled into a meeting, you're working on a project. But when you're in that virtual arrangement, those who are working from home don't have as much information. And so keeping those one-on-ones so that you keep folks focused on the task at hand is critical. And then if you do need to cancel, be really clear in your communication about why that's the case. And then find ways to collaborate. As some of you had mentioned, technology can help, and there are many tools that can support technology. We're not covering them on the call today, but it's worth exploring, different Post-it and brainstorming boards and tools that can be used to capture those creative communications. The other thing I'll say here while we're, kind of covering communication is, the modality matters. And so as a leader, whether you are communicating for results or setting expectations, I think it's incumbent upon a hybrid leader to stop and think about what technology is right for the message. When is an email appropriate? When is a text okay? And being more intentional about how you communicate across any of these elements in a way that contemplates what modality is appropriate for what you're trying to say. And then last but not least, step up your meeting game. The way you run them matters. Maybe it's things like being more intentional about creating an agenda so that everyone knows, regardless of your location, what you're going to be covering. Maybe you rotate who leads the meeting so that you're drawing people in through the computer as well as in the space. Rules of the road for the meeting so that you understand clearly what the expectations are for how you're going to conduct that session. How are you going to leverage technology? Being really mindful too of who are you hearing from in that virtual meeting space. And I thought this was a really smart call out. As a leader, watch that mute button, right? Have you ever seen where the mute button comes on and off and on? That's a clue. Somebody was going to jump in. Somebody was going to say something. So step up your game and look for some nuanced things like that. Because the bottom line is this is information from the Global Workforce Survey. They found that 42% of workers have left a meeting without saying what was on their minds. So being very careful about creating an environment of psychological safety and being attuned to the nuance of that in a virtual environment, especially since 98% of meetings will include at least one remote participant, and you want to make sure that you are consciously driving inclusive experiences where all voices are heard wherever they're joining the meeting from. So as we wrap up here, if you remember nothing else from this webinar, remember this, that word intentionality, communication and intentionality. If you can up your communication skills and be more intentional, that will enhance your leadership chops in dealing with a hybrid team. That means increasing your listening and your filtering. Listen for tone, be mindful of the modality and the frequency. How often are you communicating with your team? What does each individual need from you in terms of frequent communication? And look, the road ahead will be bumpy. You need to keep a sense of humor, right? There are going to be some days where, like this attorney, you can't figure out how to get your cat filter off of Zoom. This gentleman confirmed he was in fact not a cat and proceeded with the discussion with the judge. But you have to keep a sense of humor, right? It's going to be bumpy, things are going to come up, and as a leader, you're going to need to deal with them with that growth mindset. Hybrid's here to stay, bottom line. For many, again, not all organizations, I get that. Not every organization or position can exist in a hybrid environment. Leaders are going to need to adapt. You're going to have to up your game. Having said that, it's a shared responsibility. We talked about leadership today, but again, there's that contractor, that shared responsibility. Your people will need to make adjustments as well. If, as I said at the beginning, we're all committed to making a hybrid scenario work, as many are. Be thoughtful and intentional in your approach. Have that mindset shift, digital first, virtual first, and the same skill set. You don't need to go out and get a new set of skills as a leader. You need to apply them in a new context. And as our last commenter mentioned, definitely in a more subtle and nuanced way. And I do think it requires a higher level of skill. I think that's part of my message is you do need to up your game as a leader and apply these skill sets in a much more nuanced way. So Damien, I left us about 6 minutes. Not the best, but not the worst in terms of giving our participants some time to ask questions. And I'm happy for you to punt one or for somebody in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. That's superbly a really, really good session. And yeah, so we've got a few minutes left for some questions. A couple of ideas that came through about one idea. I love the one that Jenny Robertson suggested, which was a coffee roulette, speed dating for the office, which I thought was an interesting one to go with. And some other ideas that are in there as well. But there's a few questions that have come up. So a question that's come up is, how do you as a leader maintain or strike the balance between those people that are always office working and those that are just a few times in the office, just because it's sometimes possible for those that are not in the office to be overlooked sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, there's going to be policy that's handed to most leaders, and that's one thing that I didn't say, right? The organization is going to probably hand down some sort of hybrid policy, but you as the leader, you're where the rubber meets the road, right? You need to implement that policy, and nobody knows better than you, most likely, what's required to make that successful, because you understand in a very real way what's happening with each of your employees. At least you should. You should know what their remote reality is, what flexibility they need. So as a leader, I think you need to understand as well, based on what you know of your organization and the culture, how hard and fast is that policy? Is it, sort of general parameter? Is it you have the opportunity at the local level to implement it in a way that works for you and for your team. So I think as a leader, you need to be aware of what those guardrails are within your organization and know that to the extent you have that latitude, you're going to know at the local level what resources are required, what your team needs, what each of your people needs. And I think you need to engage in those conversations to figure out what works for that person and for you and for the team to be successful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Another question, I guess, obviously related, but similar. A few people asked a similar question, which is any thoughts about the role that the office will play in the new hybrid way of working?
Yeah, I think a lot's being certainly written and studied and talked about with respect to office space. So a lot more organizations working to less of a dedicated space for the employees and more of a hoteling type of structure where you go, you log on, you secure that space that you need for that particular day, and that is yours. That is your space. I think, and in relationship to that, fewer offices as well. So, if a leader's not going in the office, if they're leading that team remotely, maybe they don't need that space that's, closed door that has been in the past dedicated to them. Certainly within that open environment of hoteling and cubes and shared area, I'm not getting into in this conversation, but a lot being done around sort of the physical separation that needs to happen to continue to keep people safe. It's all over the road, as I'm sure many of you have read and know about, in that space, masks or no masks, requiring vaccination or not requiring vaccination. I think that is still the Wild West. Much of it is still the Wild West. And so, yeah, I mean, I would just say a lot more of that temporary hoteling type structure in the physical space than certainly the blueprint of the office looked like in the past. And it was interesting, Damien, there is an article that was written, I think it was Bold Business. They had a phenomenal visual that showed sort of the evolution of the physical workspace, and it had the picture of a worker in the field, and then the next was the factory, and then the next was a sea of cubes, and then the next was, sort of on the beach with a laptop, right? Now that we're in this work from anywhere environment. And so I just thought that was an interesting visual when you think about the physical aspect of where people do their work and the concept of, less and less people are going to go to work, and more often the work's going to come to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got time for just one very super quick final question, which is, and it's come up for a few people as well. So any thoughts about the role that leadership development will play in terms of virtual? So what are your views on virtual becoming the norm when it comes to leadership development?
Yeah, I mean, I think forever going forward, there will be some digital component of leadership development. So I'm a big believer in having a digital chassis, a digital element, where you can blend that with a VILT, a webinar, or in person when we get there, all the better if that fits the need that you're trying to meet for that journey, right? So what are you trying to accomplish? What's the right modality for whatever the skill is that you're trying to support in terms of that leadership development? But regardless of whether or not it is in person, VILT, or digital, I think all of those will have some digital chassis, some digital element. So
No,
I
that's
also
absolutely
do
right.
believe, and I know, Damien, you know this, I have a bit of a bias here. I do think that you can scale leadership development by exploring digital options. I think you have to be really nuanced, again, in how you go about it to keep human connection alive. But I do believe that leadership development can be scaled using digital solutions. And then, as I said, if you want to blend or augment, you can do ILTs and VILTs as well. But I believe forever going forward, there should be some digital element of a leadership journey.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think we've just come up on the hour, just slightly over. So well done, Leah. Thank you so much for today's session. Brilliant, really interesting. Loads of comments and chats. A whole host of questions that we haven't had time to answer. So I'll take those separately and come back to those individuals separately as well. With this session is recorded, as I said at the start, so we'll send out the recording after today. And if anybody wants to talk to Leah or I, you've got Leah's contact details, you'll have mine as well. So we'd love to continue the conversation. So good luck in all of your organizations with the next few months and weeks and into next year as well. And I look forward to seeing you on a new webinar soon. Great.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.